Thanks. Tsumimulapa from government. I hope I won't scare you. Well, fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
In your own opinion, what is it that we need to do in this country in order to reduce this high rate of unemployment, especially youth unemployment? Because at the present moment we are sitting in the 24% of unemployment. What is it that we need to do? Secondly, do you think that wage subsidy as a policy is a good idea to address youth unemployment?
Do I think that?
Wage subsidy.
The youth subsidy, wage subsidy. With respect to the first question, what do we need to do? Are you offering me a job? I think that it's very true that we need to work together. I think that I think those of us who have, at all levels, need to be a little bit less greedy and be willing to share with those who don't. It's been very distressing to me as a South African returning here after 25 years to realize that income distribution has got worse, not better. There are many things that have got better. Certainly non-economic well-being has increased. But there really does remain a lot to be done. And I think it's up to every person who lives here to think how they can creatively contribute towards job creation, whether it's by, I know this is a bit of a soft non-economist answer, but being involved in voluntary work, passing on skills, helping people to train. And of course, being reasonable, companies need to be reasonable about how their profits are shared. So that is one aspect of it. But certainly what needs to be shared most of all are jobs. And moving on to the job question, youth subsidies have worked quite well in some other countries. So one example I can cite is before the most recent change in government in the UK, there was a program for long-term youth unemployed, which basically meant that employers could hire people for 6 months. The government would pay them the minimum wage. The firms were free to pay more than that. But after 6 months, at least the young people who may never have worked before, even if they had skills, had gained that work experience. So I think there is, again, a need for the public sector and the private sector to work together. But it's very true that if young people don't get the opportunity to work and the habit of working, it can be very, very difficult for them to integrate the labor market later on.
Hello, my name is Naveed. I'm from Vanderbilt University in the States. You briefly mentioned of higher food prices, and agriculture was one of the biggest of the economic recession. It had huge deficits in terms of production. How do you see that? What do you see is the potential for agriculture in South Africa, especially because South Africa is now a net importer of foods, and how is it going to be a leader in the region?
Well, you have to look quite closely at what food gets imported and what gets exported, because it does come down to patterns of consumption. There are some interesting projects that have been born out of the World Economic Forum. I don't know if you've been following in Tanzania with respect to the South African Growth Corridor, which is a public-private partnership. I think it's going to be, I think yields in South Africa of what is grown are probably comparable with yields pretty much anywhere in the developed world, but I'm not sure of that. I'm guessing. So I think perhaps what South Africa can do that is most valuable is to pass on expertise, to invest its capital and technical know-how in the other countries in the region where yields are very low. That way, production will increase. It also works very effectively as an anti-poverty measure if it's done correctly, because, as you know, most agriculture in many of the countries that are our neighbors is done by smallholders.
Thank you very much. And I'm Judy Sandrock. I'm from the Branson Center of Entrepreneurship. We are a non-profit organization assisting entrepreneurs in building businesses around the world. What I'd like to do is I'd like to respond to some of the questions that are coming through to help a little bit. And that is that quite often what happens is that there is not enough communication between what the labor laws are actually about and how people respond in business. What I certainly find is that when we put our entrepreneurs through training on what is the Labor Relations Act and how to employ people and how to manage performance, etc., it's actually fine because then all the fog goes away. So I think a lot of the time what it is, it's about communication. And it's very easy for us to complain as South Africans, but maybe what we should do is just start catching people doing things right and have a look at what government is putting in place for us to assist us. After all, governments are there to build policy, and as business, we must implement and we must work together and communicate effectively. Now, comes to my question. When we look at the rest of the world, if we look at the US and we look at Canada, more than 50% of the employment in the US comes from small business. 66% of the employment in Canada comes from small business, and more than 2/3 of employment in Malaysia comes from small businesses. I mean, I could go on forever and ever quoting stats higher than 50%. What is it you think we can do as the public and private sector in South Africa to be more formal about how do we support small business? Because there's a lot of things happening. I get phone calls every single day from people saying, can't we work together, or can't I train your entrepreneurs, all these sorts of things. But isn't there something that we can do, and maybe even form a group like we had when we hosted the World Cup, to tackle this problem head on in a very structured way, so that we're not all scrambling trying to do something and maybe not being effective? That I would like your view on that. Thanks.
Right, well, my view on that. I agree with you. I think that small business is the backbone of any economy in terms of it thriving. I think it's become very difficult here to start a small business. Maybe it always was, I don't know. I know that in places like the UK, it's extremely easy, one day to form a company. I was speaking to a friend last night who's in the process of setting up a business. He's been waiting for over a month for the name check. Part of that problem is that the government departments are seriously understaffed. So, moving to the front of the queue can be a problem. So one clear solution is to equip government with the resources that are needed for small businesses to be able to register quickly. In terms of, it's one thing to start a company, it's another thing to make money and stay in business. There's got to be some kind of support. And maybe again, while the challenges that are confronted, that big businesses confront are very different, maybe there's scope for a mentoring system that comes out of some kind of community or social responsibility brownie point treasure chest that can be implemented by HR. This is very popular in the UK. It's also where companies do voluntary work in charities of their choice. There's nothing stopping that happening here in South Africa. The other point goes back to what you've already said, which is communication. Make the tools available. Make them available online. Make them available cost effectively. Have business advice centers where, I don't even know if you have unemployment centers here in the same way that there are job centers in the UK. There are lots of things that can be done to make it easier, and it just takes the energy, the commitment, and the focus to make it happen.